Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar, the 10:10 webinar, as we call it, because we start at 10 o'clock sharp and we have 30 minutes for the discussions. Today's webinar is about inclusive European standardization, and we'll talk about the case of gender in particular. So my name is Els, and as usual, I will be moderating the webinar in the background. Taking care a bit of your questions should you have them, etc. So all the participants this morning are muted as usual. We kindly ask you to submit your questions via the Q&A panel that you should see on the Zoom webinar panel. The presenters will first go through a presentation and then have a look at the questions afterwards. We only have 30 minutes, so please bear with us. If your question is not replied today during the live session, we will create a Q&A report that we make available from our website in any case. Should you be on Twitter, please feel free to talk about this webinar. We have a dedicated hashtag 1010webinar to do so. So I have the pleasure to introduce three wonderful ladies this morning that will talk about the topic. First of all, we have Stephanie Eynon of BSI. She's working at BSI as a standards maker, engagement and inclusion manager, and is the chair of the UNECE Gender Responsive Standards Initiative. Then we have Karin Lindmark from CIS, the Swedish Institution for Standards. She's a section manager for technical policy and standardization services and also co-convener of the ISO-IC group on gender responsive standards. And there is my colleague Deborah, who is a project manager engagement in the governance and partnership department at CEN-CENELEC. So please, ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Els, and good morning, everyone. So today we will start by introducing the topic and explaining the dimension of gender in standardization, why it matters, and how we can address it. Then we'll look at several best practices of initiatives and activities already taking place within CEN-CENELEC, but also at international level with ISO-IC, UNECE, for example, and national level. That's why I'm very glad to have with us today the two ladies as well from our members. And then we'll focus on a few takeaway for standard makers, and that will be it. But first, I would like to introduce you to our CEN-CENELEC Strategy 2030. If you haven't heard yet, CEN-CENELEC adopted their strategy laying down our goals and objectives of where we want to be in 2030. The reasons why I wanted to start there is because the importance of stakeholders' engagement and of inclusivity of our system is very much highlighted in the goals we set for ourselves for the next decades. And obviously, that's not by chance. The importance and the benefits of inclusiveness, openness, and diversity in standardization have always been at the heart of CEN-CENELEC. We very much rely on our extensive network to deliver the highest quality of standards, and our community of standard makers is the key driver to this machine. The reason is very simple. We recognize the influential role of standards in our society, and we recognize that users have very diverse profiles and diverse needs that must be taken into account to make the best quality deliverables that protect everyone and reach greatest market acceptance. I put together a very simple recipe that everybody know by now. The more diverse the standard making processes, the more diverse the inputs, hence the more inclusive and adapted to all needs and relevant to wider audience, the deliverables, and overall the higher quality standards. So for that, we very much encourage and facilitate the participation of all relevant stakeholders in our standard making processes, and we strive for the consideration of all specificities in the deliverables themselves. Simply put, inclusive is the standard in our system. Gender equality is, of course, one aspect of that, but our approach to inclusivity is also broader than that. We aim at ensuring that civil society, SMEs, researchers, innovators, regulators, but also people with disabilities and all the voices that are traditionally less present in standardization or enhanced at European level by dedicated supporting tools, groups, etc., etc. So with that, I leave the floor to you, Karin.
Thank you, Deborah. So glad to be here and talk about this very important subject. But when we talk about standards, we assume that they are written for all. Is that the case? And if not, why does it matter? Well, when tech products are created by male engineers and developers, look at my watch. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a so-called wearable. It looks fine, but is it really designed for my needs or preferences? Or would I rather have a slimmer one, for instance? And if you look at medicine and the medical field, when deciding on the best suitable medication, is size, body fat, and food preferences or habits considered? Because we know that these parameters vary if you are male or female. There are men and women of different sizes, shapes, and needs. Do we write standards that are relevant to all of them? An example is the lack of standardization of the female hygiene products. Half of the world use them. Shouldn't they be standardized? I think we need to understand and accept that these differences exist and the implication it has to what standards we write and how we write them. If all of us, and that means all women and men, look at the data with a gender lens when writing a standard, we could meet all the needs and not only the ones first presented to us. I think that this is why the gender work is important to all of us, everyone here. This is not only a matter for equal rights and possibilities. Standards usable to everyone is actually good business for the entire community. Stephanie, over to you.
Thank you, Karin. So I pose the question in a slightly different way and flip it on its head. I think sometimes being provocative can be very effective. So my question is, why shouldn't standards and standards development be gender responsive? Women are 51% of the population in Europe. Women are professionally active in every field and industry, probably, mostly. These days, I think that would be true. We're all committed to making the most relevant standards and the standards that are needed by industry and society. And gender responsive standards will simply be more relevant and address the needs of both men and women. And in so doing, we will make standards that are better for everyone and will ensure that men and women are equally benefiting from the standards. Next slide, please. So why is this important? Emphasizing what Karin said, there has been some recent research by the Standards Council of Canada that shows that men and women are not equally benefiting from the protective effects of standardization, that health and safety standards are not gender neutral, that many of the standards don't account to women, and that may be for two reasons: either the lack of involvement in women and or the lack of gender expertise. In other words, someone who can represent the differences and specifically those of women in the standards development process. And also women in employment tend to have less opportunity to volunteer, and employers are less likely to support the volunteering of female employees. This is all based on research by the Standards Council of Canada. So it is imperative that we focus on this, and we can't expect people to be superheroes. And this is something from a professor at Oxford University. This is the idea that just involving women is not going to be enough. Women will want to be involved in standards development because they have subject matter knowledge and expertise, which will help the development of those standards. We can't expect that all women will also therefore be the gender expert or solve the gender problem in standards and standards development. We must look at other ways of bringing that perspective that Karin talked about into the standards development process. Involving women is important in its own right, but we also have to look at the other ways of creating gender responsive standards. Thank you. And finally, it's not as hard as we may think. So our national standards bodies, CEN-CENELEC, we set the rules and we set the expectations for what standards should be and do. So we can change the expectations to make sure that standards are gender responsive. We also can understand the barriers to participation or to developing gender responsive standards and change them. If it's the time to participate, we can look at how people participate. And there are lots of resources to help us, and these are growing every day. So I just quickly did a Google search for European Women's Association related to particular fields, and I found all of the ones on the slide. And there are probably national organizations in many, many countries similar to these. These organizations represent a huge resource and a genuine opportunity for us to start to make change happen. So that's my note of encouragement. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Karin, for this introduction, making the case of gender. I see already a lot of questions coming in, so that's really nice. So now that's for why it matters, but concretely, what is happening in the standardization community? What actions have been taken to tackle it? I can talk for CEN-CENELEC level, of course. We started by signing the UNECE Declaration on Gender Responsive Standards back in May 2019. We signed it together with more than 20 of our members who are individual signatories. And then the next step was to launch a members survey. We really wanted the gender strategy to itself be approached in an inclusive way. So that's why our first step was to turn to our members to gather the experience of their experts, share the good practices they already have regarding what they have put in place to promote a gender inclusive standardization system. And the results of the survey served as the basis for a gender action plan, which was adopted by our General Assemblies in November 2019. The focus of our entire gender action plan approach is really to support our members by facilitating exchanges and enabling collaborations. That means among our members, of course, but also with our key European and international stakeholders. And maybe the action that I would like to highlight from the first strategic objective or gender action plan was to establish the informal gender group, or its full name is Coordination Group on Gender Diversity and Inclusivity, that both Stephanie, Karin, on top of myself are part of. This group is really in charge of leading the implementation of the activities and help further raise awareness about the topic in the European community. It's a very diverse group consisting of members interested in the topic, whether signatories of the UNECE Declaration or not. We currently have 12 members that nominated at least one, but also for some of them 2 representatives, because we are very much encouraging that the members nominate a man and a woman, all in the idea that we must change and evolve as a whole community, and that working together is the way forward. And what's also very striking from this group is the diversity of the background of the members. It's really interesting. You have HR representatives, directors for standardization work, engagement managers, program managers, etc., etc. So we get a lot of different inputs and different point of views. It's really enriching. The role again of this group is to continue to share good practices, also discuss the advancement of gender actions in members' organizations, and to continue exchanging with other groups within CEN and CENELEC with possible similar interests and objectives. The group also help ensure that the alignment of our work is correctly done with ISO and IC groups, as well as the UNECE working groups. So members act as a sort of liaisons from the different groups. So we are able to follow this work very closely to ensure the complementarity and streamlining of our activities. And I just want to give a few examples of topics that we've covered in the first year. For example, we had a discussion on HR policies and how they can be revised to ensure more inclusivity. We had a presentation on adapting the job advertisements language to attract a specific targeted audience to re-gender balance, if I can say like that, a team. We also had a lot of discussion about the collection of sex disaggregated data of national experts in technical bodies at all the different levels of standardization. Of course, we shared examples of gender responsive deliverables, etc., etc. In 2021, of course, we continue our work to further raise awareness of the importance and benefits of more gender diversity in standardization with, for example, this webinar. I just want to add maybe before that the group is open to all our members, so any new nominations is very welcome as well. And in parallel to that gender action plan, we were already involved in a couple of sectoral initiatives. Stephanie mentioned earlier a non-exhaustive list of such network or initiatives. And at CEN-CENELEC, we are directly involved with a few of them in two key priority sectors for CEN and CENELEC, so being the energy with the Women in Energy Club and the Women for Cyber Foundation, focusing on supporting girls and women in education and careers in cybersecurity. And of course, we are closely collaborating and continuing our exchange with UNECE Working Party 6, which was at the origin of the declaration. Such involvement with networks is also reflected by several of our members who are themselves committed in similar national sectoral organizations, because those, of course, are all opportunities to further promote standardization to women experts in, say, cyber, energy, etc., and thus increase the participation of women in our related technical activities. But that's for CEN-CENELEC. But Karin, I look forward to hear what CIS is doing.
Thank you, Deborah. Well, in Sweden, we do proud ourselves by saying that we have come a long way. This might be true, and the representation is relatively good in standardization, but we still have a very long way to go. I know that some of you might have attended the launch of a new ISO deliverable, and that was partly work done by SIS. ISO just published, in case you don't know, ISO have just published a unique deliverable. It's an international workshop agreement on women's entrepreneurship. This is actually the first deliverable from ISO, which exclusively focuses on sustainable development goal number 5. And we were proud, SIS was proud to lead the work together with ITC. Having said this, we now hope to focus our internal national efforts in writing gender responsive standards. And we have identified what we need to do that in steps. We strongly believe that we need to raise the awareness for all. This is not only a matter of getting more women involved, as both Stephanie and Deborah has mentioned. We need the men and everyone around the table to understand why it matters to them just as much. We think that this needs to be done by questioning the data we use when we develop the standards. And if we don't have the correct data, go out and see where we can find it. And we need to look at the language and the inclusiveness when we actually do the writing of the standards. But I also do think we need to look at the how. Are our processes inclusive? Do we attract and maintain the relevant representation? Looking at the international workshop agreement I just mentioned, it was developed entirely digitally. The digital process was, of course, forced upon us by COVID, but it turned out to be a real success. There were more than 330 experts registered from 77 countries, and that participated actively. I am wondering if this would have happened in a physical meeting process in our UK, and did this make it more possible for women to join? It's a question we need to look at. So the how is important as well. And then secondly, when the knowledge and understanding hopefully, and some checklists and tools to have been identified. We do hope that by doing so, we will attract more participants with gender awareness, and with a passion to contribute. And this can and should be both men and women. I think there are men who are, I mean, we look at the participation here today. I mean, the men equally benefit from these questions and have equal amounts to contribute. But I think what we're doing in Sweden, and I'm seeing that in other parts of the world as well, I have come to an important conclusion. While we absolutely do need more women in standardization, more women does not guarantee gender responsive standards. We need a buy-in from all, and that is what we're aiming for at CECE.
Thank you, Karin.
Thank
I give
you.
the floor to Stephanie.
Thank you. Thanks, Deborah. Thanks, Karin. Yes, I mean, I support everything that Karin has said, and we have picked up on very, very similar themes at BSI. But before I talk about BSI and what we're doing, I just wanted to address, there have been several questions in the Q&A about gender and how we're using that term. So if I may, if that's okay with everyone, I just wanted to clarify that the UNECE declaration is linked to UN Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which is specifically about women's equality and inclusion. And so the UNECE declaration and work linked to it, such as the initiative here at CEN-CENELEC, is specifically exploring how to be more inclusive of women. But of course, as Deborah said, ultimately what we would all like to see is inclusion of all. And I know it can be confusing for some people that we're using gender to refer to sex, as in male, female, but that is also very common practice. So we do want to ensure we are inclusive of all, but the gender responsive standards work at the moment is looking specifically at equality and inclusion of women. So I hope that clears that up. But so looking at what BSI is doing, as I said, we've picked up on very similar things to Karin. So we're taking a root and branch approach in our strategy. What does that mean? That means understanding the causes of the lack of diversity of our standards makers, and also why standards are potentially not as inclusive as they could or should be, and then systematically addressing those. And that root and branch approach means we're taking a look from the bottom up. We're listening to our standards makers and others about what they identify, but we're also working from the top down and being enabled to make change from the top down. So we're removing the structural barriers or the institutional barriers. Those are things like our own policies and processes, and we're transforming those in order to ensure that they are more inclusive and more enabling of all. Things like how we recruit new committee members, that we have just transformed that to try and attract the widest possible diversity of participants. And going back to that initial point, you may notice I'm talking about diversity. So BSI's Gender Action Plan is incorporated within our wider diversity and inclusion strategy and action plan. So we are looking at BSI at gender inclusion and equality of women, as well as diversity and inclusion overall, and we're looking at it together at the same time. The other thing we need to do is really drive culture change. Picking up on what Karin said, it's not just about having female experts participating in the process. That has an inherent value in its own right. We know more diverse and more gender balanced groups create better outputs and have better decision making. So we want that, but we also want to ensure that through policies and expectations, everyone is understanding how to be inclusive at all, and that everyone has an equal opportunity to be heard, and trying to drive that culture change. And part of that is about building awareness and educating people and seeking allies. So raising awareness about the benefits to everyone of more diversity and inclusion in standards development and standards, and them understanding how it would benefit them. Asking the organizations who are represented on our committees to consider diversity when nominating people to represent them. And of course, expanding our network, reaching out to new organizations, helping them to understand the benefit to them of having a voice in standards development. So we are trying to take a holistic approach to address the challenge overall through our strategy and action plan.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think now, Karin, I see the time, so if you...
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah. As you've seen today, there are lots of activities around gender in standardization right now. At the international level, I am honored, together with my IEC colleague from Standards Council Canada, Ms. Linda Gibbons, to lead one of the initiatives under the ISO Gender Action Plan. The mandate of this joint advisory group between ISO and IEC is to create tools to ensure standards of gender responsive. I want to come back to what Stephanie was mentioning earlier about how we work with the concept of gender. The ISO community is huge and consists of 164 countries. Taking a small step at a time is vital to ensure understanding across cultures and continents. And that is why we have agreed to stick to the male and female perspective of gender, hoping that down the line we may become, and we want to become, more inclusive. But for now, we want everyone to on board by taking it slowly. And that's why we've decided to go from A to B before trying to reach for Z. Even if the passion is there for all of us that work with these questions, inclusivity is so much more than male and female. One of the things we've done at the start is send out a survey, and the results came back in a couple of weeks ago. And when we see the results of that survey from the technical community, we again see that the biggest challenges is making the full technical community understand why this is important to all. Many of the replies indicated that gender is not even on the agenda. And we received answers such as, we're working on technical product issues. Our products are neither male or female. Or committee work is independent of gender. It should never be a part of committee work. So we need to raise the awareness. But our intention in this group is to provide the support, examples and tools to foster an understanding why gender matters to us all, women and men. And by the end of this year, 2021, we hope to deliver tools for the technical committees and recommendations to our governing boards that will enable our standardization community to write a truly gender responsive standards. Thank you.
Thanks, Karin. My turn again. So I'm, as Deborah, Els mentioned, I'm also chair of the UNECE Gender Responsive Standards Initiative. And I wanted to highlight that you are all invited to join that initiative and the webinars that we hold regularly, approximately every 6 weeks. And there's also a Trello board for which you have will be sent the link, there, that has past presentations and other resources from that initiative. And just to highlight here the three working groups that we've established around knowledge sharing and training around the methodology for both developing gender responsive standards and assessing the gender responsiveness of standards, and then developing our network so that we can expand participation and also promotion of gender responsive standards and standards development. So everyone again is welcome to join the initiative and participate in our webinars and get involved.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And Karin, because this is the concluding slides, right on time. Thank you very much for your time, Karin and Stephanie. I just want to conclude by repeating a few key words and key ideas. So inclusiveness is a core value of the CEN-CENELEC standardization system as reflected in our strategy and many other projects. Gender responsive standards benefit all. Diversity and inclusiveness always make for higher quality standards that protect everyone and reach greatest market acceptance. And remember my recipe, the more diverse the standard making processes, the more diverse the inputs, and hence the more inclusive the deliverables and overall higher quality of standards. The third one is that we really need you. Because such change needs to be driven by the entire community. So I'm glad that we are starting conversations today with a lot of questions, which we'll answer by lack of time in a written format. It's crucial to involve everyone and that all standard makers understand the issue and adopt a gender lens, but overall an inclusivity lens when drafting standards. Also remember, it's not just about the content itself, it's also about the environment of the standard making processes. In forward position, sharing is caring. Collaboration, exchange are the key drivers of change and of our work as standardizers. As Stephanie just reminded, the UNECE working groups are open to everyone. Signatories are not of the declaration. The CEN-CENELEC group is open to all members. Signatories are not of the declaration. So do reach out to us. And finally, we cannot undermine the gendered impact of some standards. So I'd really invite you to assume that every standard is actually gender sensitive or human sensitive to be broader, and that this should be a point of attention when drafting standards. It's not only relevant for consumer products like a bike or a firefighter jacket or PPE that was mentioned before, but it's also the workers' conditions, standards for services and processes that may be gendered impact. So that's it for today. Back to you, Els.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Yeah, we do have some questions still in the Q&A panel, but I would like to suggest to close down the webinar here because we always promise people that it takes 30 minutes. So please don't be upset if your question is not really replied today, but we do promise you that we will create a Q&A report that will be made available from the website. On top of that, you'll receive in your inbox today the presentation that has been used this morning, as well as the full recording of the webinar. So please feel free to share that with anybody who's interested in the topic. And that all that rests for me is to thank you for your attention today. Thank you as well, Karin, Stephanie, and Deborah, for this very interesting overview. And then I kindly invite you to our next webinar that will take place on the 9th of April. So not on the 10th because that is a Saturday, but on the 9th of April, we will talk about standardization in Horizon Europe. That is the new European framework program for research and innovation. So welcome everybody. You will find the link in your inbox later today. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.